Thousands of people across the globe believe Earth is a hollow sphere inhabited by an alien civilization. I can see how this sounds silly, but the Nazi Party bought it hook, line, and sinker. In fact, the Third Reich took the hollow Earth theory seriously enough to send 3 expeditions to Antarctica, starting in 1938. One of these missions was specifically designed to search for an entrance to the Earth's interior. Based on information from Arctic tribes, Tibetan shamans, and the Occult Thule Society, Nazis were convinced the possibility was worth investigating. They declared part of Antarctica Nazi territory and named it New Swabia. If the interior of the Earth was, as they believed, both hollow and inhabited, the Nazis planned to contact these inhabitants and gather their support in the war on the surface world. The isolated location provided a perfect backdrop for other, more sinister experiments: submarine technology, invisible aircraft, nuclear power. I hear the British and US military may have even sent fleets of ships down to stop the Nazi activities in Antarctica in an operation called High Jump. While this Project High Jump was officially listed as a reconnaissance mission, questions linger regarding the mysterious deaths of people involved. Many researchers believe the Nazis maintained a secret submarine and aircraft base, ultimately designing what we would recognize as UFOs. Here's where it gets crazy. Some of these people believe the Nazis did discover an entrance to the inner world. What's more, they argue Adolf Hitler may not have died in the infamous bunker suicide, but instead escaped with his supporters to the South Pole, where the secret Nazi outposts maintained control over a passage to the interior. Proponents of this theory allege that thousands of scientists disappeared toward the close of the war, retreating into the Earth. The mainstream scientific community scoffs at these allegations, but is it really that strange? We know, for instance, that the US itself recruited Nazi scientists in Operation Paperclip. And the Nazis certainly made it to New Swabia, and they felt vindicated by the endeavor, so much so that they annexed part of Antarctica to protect their claims. What did they discover amid the desolate frozen waste? Alien technology? Uranium? Or something else? Something they don't want you to know.
Major impact of UFO technology did not occur in 1947 at Roswell, but rather earlier by some 10 to 12 years in the area of Germany. And on the basis of looking at documents and talking with former scientists who worked in Germany during the war, it is clear that many of the officers saw UFOs in the sky over Germany during World War II. And even in the region of Peenemünde, where the first experiments took place, there's clear evidence that there were advanced electronic eyes and ears. They were watching very carefully the German scientific developments.
What could this structure, photographed on the Friel testing ground in the autumn of 1943, possibly be? A Friel 7 engine being tested? Possibly.
Now, we know that in the early parts of the war, there were certain factions of the Allied forces that did not believe he had a secret weapon. And it wasn't until the Americans made much emphasis of this that they began to look at it seriously, and indeed did discover that Hitler not only had a secret weapon, he had what we would call today a UFO or spacecraft. He had one already off of the drawing board and flying, and it was capable of 1,200 miles an hour, vertical takeoff, 90-degree changes, and much like a helicopter, and of course was far superior to anything the Allied powers had at that time. Secondly, they knew that he had another craft about to be up and going. It was capable of doing 2,500 miles an hour, which was double the original. And not only did it have the characteristics of the original craft, but it also had a laser weapon aboard it that was capable of penetrating 4 inches of armor. Now, needless to say that that really spooked the Allied forces into making a redemptive attempt against him and bringing him into a state of capitulation.
What then became of all the secret projects carried out during the Third Reich? There are indeed a whole series of explanations. One is that the most important flying saucer was purposely sent to the bottom of Lake Mondsee in Upper Austria. Another is that they were concealed somewhere in South America and in the Antarctic. And not just that. Some people actually maintain that there is a German UFO base in the Antarctic, and that many were brought there disassembled by submarines. But why did the Allies under Admiral Byrd mount an invasion of the Antarctic?
I would like to say that among the many scenarios, of course, was the reality that there were some 30 missing German submarines that came from Baltic port areas at the close of World War II. These submarine systems had the Walter snorkel system, which allowed them to stay under water for weeks at a time. And this advanced technology made the German U-boats some of the finest in the world at the time, as acknowledged by U.S. naval documents. It is conceivable that some of this advanced technology could have been put on the submarines, spirited out, and with the snorkel system could have made for Argentinian ports and even the facilities there in Queen Maanland or Neues Schwabenland. I say this as a strong possibility, having seen the film that was made in 1947 with Admiral Byrd and Admiral Wood. I had the opportunity to actually see portions of this film, and what struck me was the fact that there was a significant military contingent that went down to Antarctica with Admiral Byrd. Why was it necessary to bring some 4,000 soldiers, a battleship, an aircraft carrier, and a support team to go into an area if it was purely a geological/geophysical exploration? Clearly there were other unknown factors there, and it was up to the Americans to see if they could acquire this missing technology. That is one scenario.
After a few days, however, and the loss of an undisclosed number of aircraft, the operation was abruptly terminated. What happened? What mysterious opponent could have repelled the Allied invasion so quickly and decisively? Could it have been the few remaining members of the German armed forces?
Later reports indicated that Admiral Byrd was given 8 months and unlimited funding to go in and pull this thing successfully off. But we also know that within 8 weeks he was totally defeated. Now, the supposition at that point was that there was an advanced civilization and technology, most probably alien. There were with the Third Reich and the SS who was in Antarctica, and that those great and developed technologies were used to defeat Admiral Byrd.
At the South Pole, it is clear that under the structures of ice, there are many layers of civilization, suggesting at one earlier point of time when the conditions of the South Pole were different. Clearly, there was some type of civilization there. This, of course, is assuming that the shell of the Earth had a different north and south magnetic pole. And with the shifting of the pole, this region became suddenly very, very frigid. And thus, we do not see any evidences on the surface of these so-called earlier conditions of intelligence. However, I believe with the further exploration of the documents that both Admiral Byrd brought to the attention of the world after World War II, and the Brazilian Navy uncovered in 1961 with its subpole expedition, that extraterrestrial intelligence is also operated out of the area of the South Pole.
What was it that Admiral Byrd found on the South Pole? Incredibly enough, in an official American Navy documentary film, we found footage of what Admiral Byrd found on the South Pole. He found giant freshwater, never freezing lakes with areas around them that were free of any snow. And in that film, we show footage of the Navy planes landing in these lakes. But even more so, he found, to his amazement, that his planes were disappearing very quickly. A lot of his planes were attacked by anti-gravity devices that were operated by the Germans there, by anti-gravity saucers. A lot of them crashed into invisible barriers and disintegrated in mid-flight. This is an indication that the Germans had already perfected the force field shields and they were up and operational around the German colony at Neuschwabenland. And in an interview at Buenos Aires on his way back, Admiral Byrd made the incredible statement that the Third World War would probably be with an adversary coming from the polar regions of our planet, an adversary that has the ability to fly unobstructed from pole to pole. He was referring to the Germans at their south polar colony at Neuschwabenland that were operating their anti-gravity craft with impunity and could fly circles around the globe and, of course, would shoot out of the sky any of the attacking American planes.
And tell me a little bit about Admiral Forrestal.
Well, an amazing guy. First of all, he was the first Secretary of the Navy, but he was also one of the original founding members of Majestic 12, which Majestic 12 was a group that was created pretty much by the military to oversee all of the alien-related information, basically as a control mechanism to make sure that everything that came out or got out was filtered through them.
And that was during Truman's administration, right?
Absolutely. And Majestic 12 was originally organized by a guy by the name of General George C. Marshall in July of 1947 to study the Roswell-Magdalena UFO crash, recovery, and debris. And that was fascinating. Remember that he was probably the closest man in the world to Richard Byrd. Okay, that's what people have got to figure out, why he had this strange accident. He goes into Bethesda Naval Hospital. They put him in there, his fellow generals, because he's got two issues.
Now, is he in there as the admiral or as the Secretary of the Navy?
That's a good question. As the Secretary of the Navy.
Okay.
He was replaced by a different general in Majestic, but they supposedly stated that he was having emotional issues. Well, what was bugging him, according to people that knew him, including his son, was he wanted to tell the American people what was going on. So out of the 16th floor of Bethesda Naval Hospital, he supposedly commits suicide. The fascinating thing about Admiral Forrestal, who became Secretary of the Navy, is that he was absolutely in great spirits. His own son said he would never have committed suicide. He was talking about his son about what they were going to do. He was looking forward to getting released.
Man.
And somebody somewhere says time to suicide. And by the way, Forrestal and Vince Foster are two of the highest-ranking men in the U.S. government who have ever committed suicide, or a better way to say it, have ever been suicided.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Doug Hagman's done a fabulous job on Vince Foster's death. Doug's specialty is blood-stain evidence. And so I don't know, if people can recognize it, but there are certain things that you look for in suicide. And when you don't find those things, you say, okay, who had the most to gain?
Right.
And what Richard Byrd was more concerned about than everything, Admiral Byrd, was the fact that even in those days, they shared Eisenhower's concern about the military-industrial complex. The idea was if you keep everything in the dark, you can milk it for the cash benefit. In other words...
But let's make an assumption for a moment that Forrestal was about ready to go public, let's say, about Roswell.
Exactly. And also about, interestingly enough, about the Arctic, and then also about Operation High Jump, which we haven't even talked about tonight. We've done it before, but most people don't realize we went to war in Antarctica with a contingency of the Nazis over not only secret technology, but the finds that the Nazis located in Antarctica, which they called New Schwabenland. And after the Nazis, which is called Operation High Jump, what specifically Majestic at that point was concerned about is that he would spill the beans on what was found in the Arctic. He would spill the beans on what was found in the Antarctic. He was anti-United Nations, so obviously the globalists of his day didn't like him for that. And the point is that he believed that because of the way we had handled the closing of World War II, that the international, if you will, illuminists had pretty much taken control after World War II. And, when you look at Eisenhower and Eisenhower's trip to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and all of the cover that went into that story, in other words, to see the Roswell find, it becomes more and more obvious that to contain the truth and to keep the truth, a lot of people have died who have tried to bring out the truth.
Well, I got to tell you, the Admiral Byrd story is one of the strangest I've ever heard, because it comes from someone of such credibility. And, he had his diary. It's just a bizarre story. I mean, to have his plane, as you say, the engine's cut off, and it's glided into this other land, Shangri-La, wherever it may be, within the center of the planet. The curvature, I guess, is ever so slight. He never realized he was making that spin right into it. And then these beings taking advantage and helping him. They were good beings, apparently, and then they let him go, and off he went. What a story.
Well, it's a huge story. And again, if this was just some guy that was flaky, I mean, you have Richard Byrd in the history of the Navy is considered, and in the history of exploration, I mean, you don't have a better pedigree of a human being or a braver man, a more adventurous man, a more honest man. So they can't assassinate his character.
Did he ever try to go public with this? Because he wrote these notes in a diary, but he really never said much about it when the events occurred when he came back, right?
Well, the whole thing is Forrestal and Byrd were planning on going together and going public with it, and Forrestal basically, when he was suicided, Byrd went into kind of I guess you'd almost say a self-imposed exile, from the standpoint that the only thing he would allow at that point is his diary to be released after his death.
That probably scared the heck out of him.
On the 19th of February 1947, American explorer Rear Admiral Richard Byrd of the U.S. Navy flew to the South Pole. It's said that when he came back, he wrote down what had happened on this expedition. Richard Byrd had indeed discovered an entrance to the center of the Earth.
The center of the Earth is hollow with an empty space, and that people or creatures inhabit this area inside the center of the Earth.
And that inside the Earth live some sort of super beings.
Some say they're demons, others have said no, they're just the basis for stories of gnomes and trolls.
They're tall humanoid creatures that are very advanced.
There's a hole in the Antarctic, supposedly, where these creatures fly out of and fly back into, and there's a whole allegedly super civilization living inside the planet.
And between that inside area and the exterior of the planet are tunnel systems or cave and cavern systems that basically vein the entire planet.
Once you accept the fact that the Earth could be hollow, you can take any of the mysteries and use that as your basis, and you'll find that there are no longer mysteries.
Even present-day governments are fueling the conspiracy.
The government has thrown many hints. They've taken photographs and given them to key people who investigate these things, and then ridicule them later, and it's all a misinformation game.
The Hollow Earthers also claim U.S. legislation that prevents citizens from exploring caves is specifically aimed at stopping them reaching the Earth's center.
You're not allowed to go into a cave or a natural opening in the Earth without a federal cave permit or a federal cave expert with you. And also, any locations of caves that are otherwise on government property or public property that the public doesn't know about, they cannot, through the Freedoms of Information Act, sequester the government for the information as to where those caves are. So there is a concentrated effort to keep people from exploring the underworld.
So if you go along with this, why are governments keeping their knowledge of the Hollow Earth secret?
The big cover-up is if the people found out that there was a tropical paradise inside the Earth, they would migrate, and it would end the New World Order, and they would have to start all over again.
So, life in the Hollow Earth, aliens in caves, Masonic symbols in architecture, phallic symbols in abundance, are they all just the products of a fevered imagination?